Hello, my name is Haley Dolosic, and I am Program Manager of English Language Programs at Washington University in St. Louis. And I am thrilled to share with you today a few tools and strategies I have for getting collaborative learning into those online places where we are teaching our courses these days. And so we're going to start first, of course, with why we're worried about collaborating as we're moving into these online spaces. Well, the truth of the matter is, there's a lot of research that substantiates the importance of peer-to-peer interaction for linguistic skill and content knowledge development. And so we're leaning into that and we're believing that research. And of course, that means that we need to have opportunities, right? We need to offer opportunities for students to communicate in open-ended and challenging tasks regularly. That's definitely what the research points to. And so how do we do that, of course, right? We need some tools. And so there are many tools for synchronous and asynchronous approaches to online learning. And so today I'm going to talk you through 4 of these scenarios or situations where you might apply these tools with exemplar tools that you can use. And for each tool, we're going to talk about what specific apps or tools might be best for you, what using those tools actually looks like. And I have a couple of them that I have screenshots for you guys to see inside the tool today. And then of course, we're going to talk about best practices for implementation, because whenever we're implementing a new tool, we want to make sure that we are using it in the best way that aligns with most research we possibly can. And so that is what we'll cover today. First things first, we're going to talk about synchronous classes. And of course, synchronous classes in this setting are classes where you're meeting online, but you're meeting all together at the same time, versus asynchronous courses are going to be online courses where students are interacting with the content and material at separate times from when you're distributing them, and that students may interact with each other at different times of the day, but on the same content. And that's kind of the difference there between synchronous and asynchronous. So let's start with synchronous tools. First things first, we have a share doc. Now, this is a tool that you may use with your colleagues or in a variety of different ways, but whether you're using Box, Google Docs, Padlets, or Dropbox, Evernote, any of it, what you'll find is that students are able to collaborate together in shared documentation, and this can be a really beneficial tool for them to get that collaborative work done. Here I have an example of what one of those documents looks like. This is Box. And so what I've done here is just created a worksheet that students are going to collaborate on together. And of course, this is group 1's situation. And so they'll work together on this document, and I'll share it with them, right? By making them editors of this document, they'll be able to communicate with one another on the document and type up an answer together to whatever prompts I put out. And that's something that I definitely love to use share documents for. In addition, you can give them examples in shared documents, and they can give feedback, or they can put their own work in a shared document and give each other feedback on written work. There are lots of opportunities to use share docs to solve problems together, practice, overcome scenarios, practice giving feedback and getting feedback and implementing feedback, etc. And so shared documents just become this great tool where students can both see the same thing and write on it together and create this visual contract at the end, right? And what's really great about it is you can do it in breakout rooms. And so you'll put them into breakout groups or breakout rooms in Zoom or whatever online software you're meeting with for your meetings, and your video software like Zoom or Skype. And you'll have them work in those smaller groups and come back together and share back. And that idea of they've worked deeply together to come up with an answer that they can share back is one of the hallmarks of great collaborative communication. And so I think share docs can facilitate that and support students in that, particularly as they are learning English and they're looking for greater support. Having that visual input alongside the oral input can be especially helpful. For best practices, you want to make sure that you're compiling all these student responses into a single document that they can refer back to later. That way they can use these ideas in their portfolios or in their projects, right? And they can bring out the concepts. That way the collaboration doesn't feel like just another activity, but instead feels like a basis of content for the course. And so I highly recommend compiling the share docs or making them shareable beyond each small group so that individuals can see beyond their own group's response. And it also helps if you can synthesize or summarize for them to have key takeaways. That's one of the key points of any interactive class, right? Okay, the other thing you can do for synchronous presentations or synchronous lessons is interactive presentations. Now, I hear what you're telling me, Haley, we already do interactive presentations. I do slides, I ask questions, we talk, right? This is another layer of that can be done with technology. And so tools that you can use include Nearpod, Pear Deck, Mentimeter, there are others. And what these tools do is they allow you to upload your slides and embed questions into the slides to get formative feedback across the lesson and ensure that everyone is paying attention as you go through your presentation. And so you present to your students while they log in from their own devices. And as you advance through your slides, they advance on their screens and they're required to respond to these prompts or questions, right? And so this is kind of what that looks like. You upload your slides and then you add in questions. And you can see here, I've got 2 open-ended questions in this presentation. You can have lots of different kinds of questions with Nearpod. I particularly am more familiar with this one. And so I've really enjoyed using Draw It or Collaborate Board or having them do a quiz because they're able to respond to the presentation right within that suite, and you're able to move them through the presentation. You have a little bit more control over what they're seeing and what they're doing, right? Hopefully this keeps them a little bit more on task if you're finding you're losing your students to a certain extent. Well, how do they log in, Haley? Well, you give them this code that they go to nearpod.com on their device, right? This is a screenshot from an iPhone. They go to nearpod.com, they enter that code and they join, and then they're able to join your presentation wherever you are. And when you send out a question, it prompts out to them. And when they submit back, you're able to see what rate of participation you had, who answered the question in what way, and you can share back their answers. And when you share them back, they're anonymous. So you can have this as a basis for a discussion. So you could have students answer a question anonymously to the large group, and then you can toss them into breakout rooms to discuss those answers, or you can discuss them in your larger Zoom room if possible for you. Depends upon the size and the feasibility of all that, of course. But that's kind of how the synchronous interactive presentations work and how they look on the inside. Whenever you do this, you want to make sure that you share back those student answers so everyone knows what others are saying, right? And they're able to learn from one another, in addition to having this great capacity for understanding, the questions and staying with you and being able to work through the content with you. They'll also have the opportunity to see everyone else's answers and to see everyone interacting as a community, which can be really helpful in these spaces where creating a community is a little bit more challenging, those synchronous online courses. All right, so those are our 2 synchronous options. Now we're going to move into some asynchronous tools. I love to use a partnered call in an asynchronous session. And by a partnered call, I mean that students are able to call each other and record that call and submit it to you. And in this way, they are going to talk about a variety of topics that you assign to them, but they're going to be able to communicate with one another and develop connections together. So the ways that I do this are through Zoom, Skype, Facebook, WhatsApp, WeChat, more, right? Most often I have them meet up for a Zoom, and I create a structured task for the students. They schedule a meeting together and they complete that task. They can discuss course content, during that time. And so in this way, they're able to discuss, oh, this is my writing process. This is what I usually do first, second, third. What do you do? And they're able to exchange ideas and strategies. And then at the end, I have them reflect on this conversation and have 2 or 3 key takeaways and submit the recording to me to prove that, of course, they met with their partner and that they did have a conversation. One of the cool things it allows me to do is verify that 2 speakers did speak English for at least 30 minutes with someone that week. That's particularly helpful for my students who are currently in country rather than being in the United States, that they're able to have someone to talk to for that amount of time in English and really talk about things that matter to them, right? They're writing every single day for their research. And so being able to communicate with someone else who's writing as much as they are can be a lot of fun, particularly in the language they're learning to write in or working on their writing in, as it were. And of course, best practices for this are going to require a lot of structure, right? You're going to need to have your students have a set of questions they need to answer, or a clue they need to solve, or a project they need to work on, something like that, where they're all meeting together and sharing and having conversations. And one of these I actually did, I had students come out with a presentation at the end about their discipline style of writing. What does it look like? And part of that structure that I gave them was that they had to share examples with each other in this talk. And then after they shared examples, they had to talk about what principles really defined their disciplinary writing. And by doing that, I was able to see each student work through their day-to-day thought processes and conversations by explaining examples to one another. And they were able to come up with a synthesis of, okay, well, if that's what's important in your part of the discipline and that this is what's important in my part of the discipline, I actually see what you're saying in my example too. That must be a consistent factor, but I don't see the part that I showed you in yours. So maybe that's not always there, right? They're sharing the variability of their disciplinary writing, and they're having these deep conversations about examples of writing that they can use for their own work. And I found that really, really interesting, but it was only possible because I gave them a series of procedures that they had to follow, wherein they were discussing exemplars in a specific way. And so I really recommend that you give them as much structure as you can for that task so that they know what's next for each time. And of course, I usually set up a time expectation, right? You're expected to speak for at least 20 minutes, but you can speak for longer. I also allow them to have this dynamic interaction, right? So I want to make sure that they're having a conversation with each other. And so I really want to make sure that they say, hi, how are you? How's it going? How are things for you, etc. And so I'll tell them that they can record that or not, but they should be greeting and getting to know their partner as well as part of the prompt, so they're encouraged to have those conversations. One of the things we find in online courses is actually how much students focus on content. Typically, the conversation of an online course is 90% about the content of the course and only 10% about that individual's personal experiences, versus in the classroom, you'd have more of a 70-30 split. And so generally speaking, by adding these partnered calls, I'm hoping to give them a little bit more time to share individual experiences and connect, because it helps them to connect ultimately with the content as well. So love an asynchronous partnered call, and students who are in the same time zones, I usually pair together for feasibility, things like that, that make it a little bit easier and for students to really connect, collaborate, and have conversations. So that's one of our asynchronous tools. We'll move on to our last tool. These are video discussion boards. And so literally using the discussion board in your learning management software, whether that's Canvas or Blackboard, you can prompt your students with a video and then have them respond to you and to each other with videos. And so one of the coolest parts about this for me is that my students really seem to enjoy recording themselves and posting it. And I really encourage them not to record, 3, 10, 20 times, but instead on their first or second take to take that example and to upload it, because that gives them an opportunity to practice once or twice and submit, and they're able to really communicate in a real setting where they're exchanging ideas, and they get excited to be on camera and see each other and connect in that way as well, which I really enjoy. My students also really like to talk to one another in terms of turn taking. Like they'll notice how to ask a question at the end of their first bit, or how to respond to a question that was asked of them. And they're able to see that turn taking a lot more transparently through a video chat board than through a written chat board where things all have to be written. And of course, that's kind of how online courses work. They're written content heavy. And so students are going to often be writing more than they would be in the face-to-face classroom. And so they're going to ask us, of course, if we can reduce the written content. And then by adding these video discussions, you're increasing their exposure not only to spoken content, but to the idea of turn taking and seeing how a good turn functions. And so for best practices, you're going to need a topic that can be discussed for greater than 3 turns, right? They need to be able to talk back and forth and back and forth. And this is also really great because you get to hear from everyone, even your shy students. I also really love to use this in the sense that it does not have to be one original and then 2 replies, like most discussion boards, right? So students don't have to respond directly to me. They can respond to another person on the board. Generally speaking, I just say give 1 long response, 2 minutes, and 1 short response, 1 minute for each round. And in that way, they're going to give each other a lot of content and information that they're able to exchange and share. And especially if I give them a good prompt, they end up talking much longer than 2 and 1 minutes, and they seem to really enjoy connecting in this way. It also is really convenient for them. They can record at 1 a.m. or at noon, depending upon their comfort and convenience and the rest of their schedule. And they seem to really enjoy that as well. Alrighty, so that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you at the Q&A, and I look forward to that. Take care.